They say grief dulls with time. Mine sharpened into a blade, because the face I saw on the morning news wasn't a stranger. It was the boy I raised, the man who erased me. Before I tell you how I learned the truth, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so more people hear a grandmother's story of betrayal, silence, and the kind of heartbreak that doesn't end. I am Ruth. I've lived most of my life in a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of place where the map folds into mountains and the mist hangs low over the pines. Back then, in the spring of 1996, my son, back then he was still my boy, even at 23, left our driveway before the sun had bothered to rise. He had a second-hand lunch pail, a dented thermos that smelled like coffee and peppermint, a promise tossed over his shoulder like spare change. Home by supper, Mama. He had my eyes, his father's stubborn jaw. He was quiet, steady, the sort of young man who stacked his work shirts by color and lined up his boots like soldiers. He'd been welding at the furniture plant for almost 2 years, said he was saving for a starter home and a used bass boat. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't restless. He liked routine. Eggs at 6, the highway at 6:30, the same left turn by the feed store, the same pull into our gravel drive at 5:45, like clockwork. It was April 12th, a Friday, the kind that pretends to be gentle. The sky was gray and patient. The radio in my kitchen muttered weather and cheap jingles. I stood at the stove with my robe still tied and watched him lace his boots. He kissed my cheek. He laughed when I told him I'd keep the biscuits warm. "Save me the corner piece," he said. Then the screen door squeaked. The old Chevy coughed. The sound thinned and was gone. I wiped the counter. I set out 2 plates, habit more than hope. I folded laundry. I hummed a hymn my mother used to hum when she was calming an empty house. The day hovered. The first dogwood blossoms blew across the porch like small white hands waving. Noon came, then 3, then 5. My chest felt tight, like I'd been running. At 5:30, I set the biscuits in the oven again. At 5:45, I listened for the sound of tires and gravel. At 6, I stepped onto the porch and watched the curve of the road. At 6:16, the neighbor's porch light flicked on. At 6:30, the wind lifted my hair and nothing else moved. Fear arrived quietly, like fog coming up from the river. It has a weight. It sits behind your ribs and breathes for you. At 7, I called the plant. The supervisor on evenings knew my name. Small towns make sure of that. He said my son had clocked out at 4 on the dot. "Good week," he added, like that made it softer. He joked about the ball game, said he was headed home. No fights, no warnings, no strange men in the parking lot. He just left. I told myself the truck had sputtered and died somewhere past the ranger station. Maybe he'd pulled off to help someone fix a flat. He was the kind who did that, the kind who stopped for a shaking dog in the rain and brought it home wrapped in his coat. I poured coffee. I did not drink it. The clock ticked like a hammer in a quiet church. 8, 9, 10. By midnight, I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my sweater and my keys. I drove the route I'd watched him drive since high school. The 2-lane curled through the dark like a question. I saw deer on the shoulder, a fox crossing slow as a secret. Headlights skimmed road signs. I pulled into the old gas station with the broken Pepsi machine. The clerk shook his head. A blue Chevy? Not today. I checked the turnouts, the ditches, the places where shadows swallow things whole. The mountain held its breath and refused to speak. At 2 in the morning, I was back in my kitchen unknotting my fingers. I phoned the sheriff. He was kind in that procedural way, the kind that makes you feel like your life is a form they've filled 100 times. "He's an adult," he said. "Sometimes young men need a few days to think." I told him my son wasn't the kind who wandered. He didn't drink, he didn't owe, he didn't vanish. "Give it the night," he said, and I listened because I was raised to respect men with badges. I hung up and stared at the porch light like it was a prayer. Morning came raw and empty. I made biscuits I did not eat. I walked the roadside again. I knocked on doors. I asked questions. People were gentle. People were awkward. People offered casseroles because that is what Southerners do when they do not know what to say. By Sunday, a deputy took our statement at the kitchen table. He wrote down height, weight, a scar by the left eyebrow he got from falling off his bike when he was 8. Any girlfriends? No, I said, too quickly. He works, he fishes, he sleeps. The deputy nodded, and I could see the file already thinning in his mind. The days blurred. Flyers, phone calls, rumors. A report of a blue truck outside a pawn shop 2 counties over. I drove there with my heart in my mouth. It was not his. A woman swore she'd seen him buying bait near Lake Lure. The clerk remembered a tall boy with kind eyes. He remembers a lot of tall boys with kind eyes, it turns out. I kept his room the way he left it. I smoothed the quilt. I set his boots side by side. I left the window cracked because I read somewhere that spirits find open windows. I slept in his bed sometimes, curled up like a child, my ears stretching into the night for the sound of tires and gravel. Weeks stubbed into months. The sheriff's calls slowed. The flyers curled at the corners. The photographs faded to a sallow blue. People stopped asking and started avoiding. Grief makes neighbors nervous. Betrayal makes them whisper. I heard it on the aisle with the canned peaches. Maybe he ran off. I heard it by the church steps. Maybe there was something we didn't know. Secrets, deception, abandonment, words that taste like pennies and rain when you say them out loud. There were whispers about his foreman, about shifts being cut, about a fight by the loading dock that nobody could prove happened. There was a story about a stranger near the bus station. There are always stories. Hope can be a rumor that eats you alive. 4 months in, the river got dragged. The banks were lined with men in waders who did not look at me when they climbed out empty-handed. I brought coffee. I thanked them for bringing me nothing. That is another thing grief teaches you, how to say thank you for a brand new kind of nothing. The plant closed early that fall. The jobs dried up like leaves, and the young men who looked like my son packed what they could and tried elsewhere. Every time I saw the back of a head with the same slope of the neck, the same way the shoulders carried the day, my breath caught and hurt. I learned to keep bandages in my purse for when hope broke skin. The first winter without him was white and long and rude. On Christmas Eve, I set out an extra plate. I lit a candle and left it in the window because my grandmother used to say it guides the lost. I learned later that sometimes it only lights the place where you keep your waiting. And then the years began to stack, quiet, heavy. I grew into my widow body, lighter and smaller than I remembered being. I made a life out of small, faithful things. Church on Sundays, beans and cornbread on Mondays, letters to an address that did not exist. I addressed them to him anyway and put them in a shoebox because the post office doesn't deliver to the past. I never stopped looking at faces. I never stopped listening for the sound of a Chevy that coughed twice before it settled. I made peace with the kind of prayer that sounds like a mother bargaining with the air. 29 years later, just this past spring, an ordinary morning turned into a crack of lightning. I had the news on for noise. I had my hands around a mug for warmth. The headline crawled by like a snake in the grass. Contract investigator detained in Oregon identity probe. I almost changed the channel. Then the photograph filled the screen. Time didn't slow. It didn't stop. It leapt, cruel and exact, from the kitchen where a boy tied his boots to the screen where a man I knew by the bones of his face looked up into a storm of cameras. His hair was gray at the temples. His jaw was set in that same I won't blink way he used as a child when I told him the truth he didn't like. He was being led by 2 officers in dark suits. The name at the bottom of the screen was not his. The birthplace was mine. Born in North Carolina, missing since 1996. I didn't drop the mug. I didn't scream. I reached out and touched the screen like that could make it warm. The reporter's voice was flat, practiced. Multiple aliases, federal contracts, 2 marriages under a false name, no documented family. Each word was a small, clean cut. Together, they made an outline of a life where I did not exist. Betrayal has a sound. It's not a shout. It's the soft click of a lock you didn't know you owned. I turned off the television and sat in the quiet. I thought of biscuits waiting in a warm oven. I thought of a porch light that burned down to its bulb. I thought of the mountain road that kept my secrets and his. All those years I begged God for one thing: let him be alive. And here it was, the answer wrapped in another question. Why didn't he come home? Why did he bury me while my heart still beat? Neighbors still wave at me when I check the mail. They do not know that the dead came back with a new name and handcuffs. They do not know that silence can be a kind of cruelty you choose. I went inside. I sat at the table where the wood is soft from years of elbows and tears. I turned the television back on. I watched the clip again and again until I could recite the reporter's lines like a psalm. And then I saw it. A half second when my son looked up, just beyond the cameras, as if he was checking whether the past had followed him into the light. He blinked, his mouth tightened, and I knew. This wasn't an accident. This was a decision, a clean cut, a name traded for another, a family folded and set aside like last season's coat. People will say there are reasons: fear, danger, secret work, maybe. Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe the life I'd built for him felt small. Maybe he wanted a story that didn't include a mother with flour on her hands and a porch light that wouldn't go out. I would have forgiven almost anything: a crime confessed, a child I didn't know, a mistake that cost him years. I would have forgiven the truth. What I don't know how to forgive is the lie that lasted 29 years and the coffin he built for me in his paperwork. I'm not done. The next thing I did, well, it changed the course of this story again, and it taught me that betrayal can echo through blood like thunder off the ridge. If you were in my shoes, would you pick up the phone or let the past stay buried? Tell me in the comments. And if this chapter held you, please subscribe. More of my story is coming, and I'll keep the porch light on for you. The first call broke me. The second call lit a fuse. Because when a mother is told her child doesn't want to be reached, something inside her goes very still, and then it starts to burn. Before I tell you who answered on that third try, tap subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This is a grandmother's testimony about silence, deception, and the price of starting over. I stared at the television until the ticker looped again. Oregon detention, identity probe, multiple aliases. I wrote the name on the screen in a shaky hand: Caleb Hart. That was the one he wore on camera. I wrote the case number, the county, the time of the press conference. I wrote it all down like a recipe for a life that did not include me. I made the first call to the county office, a switchboard, a careful voice. She asked for my relation. I said, "Mother." The line softened. Then it hardened. "Ma'am, he has declined contact with anyone from his past." Declined. Such a polite word for a slammed door. I thanked her. Habit. I was raised to be polite, even when my heart was being folded like laundry. I made the second call to the public defender's office. A man this time. Efficient. Phrases like pending review and advised not to engage and minimal outside contact. He asked me if I wanted to leave a number. I almost laughed, as if my phone hadn't been sitting there for 29 years, like a dog out a window. I hung up and stared at my hands. They looked like my mother's hands, thin, veined, strong anyway. Then I did what I know how to do. I made a list. Names, numbers, offices. 3 local reporters, 1 clerk at the detention center, 2 churches near the courthouse, because the women at church always know things the men don't. I made coffee I didn't drink. I put on my good sweater. I sat at the little kitchen table that had held so many casseroles from other people's grief. The third call was to a number the news anchor mumbled fast. An office attached to the federal building, a place where gatekeepers wear crisp shirts and say no like it's policy and prayer. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was clipped but not unkind. I told her my name, my son's name, the one I gave him, and the one he took. There was a pause, paper moving, keys clacking. "I can't share details," she said. Then the voice softened. "But he's been released pending further inquiry." Released? The word fell like a plate. It did not break, but my hands shook anyway. "Released to where?" I asked. "We don't have that information," she said. "He declined a contact list." Did he know I called? My voice was too small. It sounded like a girl's voice, not a grandmother's. "I'm sorry," she said. Then, quietly, like a person and not a badge, "He told our office years ago that his family was deceased." Deceased. A word for the paper, not the heart. He had buried me in his forms. He had folded me into the section where they ask you to list the dead. Betrayal has a paper trail. Sometimes it's typed. I went very still. Then I thanked her again. I hung up and pressed both palms flat on the table until the wood remembered my shape. I did not cry right away. I walked onto the porch and looked at the mountains. The ridgeline had always steadied me. It did not steady me now. I thought of his childhood laugh. I thought of the day he learned to drive. The way his father stood with his hands on his hips, pretending not to be proud. I thought of the last pan of biscuits I let go cold. That night, I wrote him a letter. I wrote it plainly. I told him I saw his face. I told him I am alive. I told him I forgave a truth I do not understand. I told him his childhood room still smells like pine cleaner and summer. I told him his mother, the one he buried on paper, has a name and a grave and a necklace he bought her for Mother's Day when he was 13. I told him I can meet him anywhere. A church, a diner, a parking lot where the lights hum. I told him I would be quiet if that's what he needed. Just 5 minutes to see if the boy I raised still lives behind those gray temples and that hard mouth. I mailed it to a place that would not say where he was. I mailed it anyway. I kept the receipt like it could be a bridge. The next morning, an envelope was on my porch. No stamp, no return address. Tucked under the mat like something left by a neighbor too shy to knock. I knew every neighbor. None of them leave notes like that. Inside was a single key and a street name I recognized 2 towns over. A storage facility. Cheap and clean. The kind of place people rent when they have more past than space. There was a number penciled on the card. Unit 117. I drove there because I am a mother, and because I am stubborn, and because sometimes we are given exactly one string to pull. The clerk barely looked up. "Rent's paid through December," he said when I slid the card across the counter. I hadn't told him a word. He handed me a clipboard. I signed a name that felt both true and small. The lock on 117 stuck. Keys always stick when your hands shake. Inside, the air was sweet with cardboard and dust. Boxes, a metal shelf, a battered cooler, a folded tarp, a shoebox with my maiden initials on the lid. My breath went thin. On top of the first box, a photograph. Not old, 5 years ago, maybe. My house, my porch, my lamp with the cracked shade lit in the front window. The angle was low, like someone took it from a car parked by the ditch. I could see my own shadow at the kitchen sink. The date was printed small in the corner. He had been here. He had come back with a camera. He had looked. He had not knocked. This is what betrayal does to a body. The heart clenches like a fist. The ribs open, and there is wind inside your chest. Love and injury share a room, and neither one will leave. The second box held maps: North Carolina, Tennessee, Utah. One map had a route drawn in pencil to a town outside Salt Lake, a circle around a cul-de-sac with a girl's name on a sticky note, June. Beneath it, a date, 10 years old at the time the note was written. No other clues, no last name, no guarantee, just a girl's name printed like a prayer. I sat on the concrete floor and let my breathing become louder than my thoughts. He had a child in his orbit. Maybe not his. Maybe a neighbor's kid he favored. Maybe a student in a class his second wife taught. Or maybe, my mind went there and then away, a granddaughter I had not met because I was dead on a form he signed. The shoebox with my initials held receipts, motel rooms with numbers I could call, a photo strip from a halfway lit booth, 2 frames with a woman whose face was turned just so, her smile thin and wary. In the last frame, his hand on her shoulder. a ring on his ring finger, not the same ring in both frames. The cooler held only paper, photocopies of forms, applications, a page where Caleb Hart became Daniel Cole for 2 years, then slid back again, government letterheads, redacted lines like black bars in a jail of ink. I found one more envelope, small, heavy, a safe deposit key taped inside with the name of a bank in Reno, Nevada. He had lived in the desert, too. He had kept his lives in boxes and drawers and airless rooms. He had scattered them across the West like breadcrumbs for a bird that would never land. I closed the unit and leaned my forehead against the cold door. The mountain air outside had the clean bite of early spring. I could hear the highway. I could hear the workday moving past other people's windows. On the drive home, I did something I am not proud of. I dialed a number I had saved for 19 years but never used. My sister. We hadn't spoken since the month after he vanished. Grief makes family brittle. We said hard things when we should have held hands. But I needed a witness now. I needed someone to stand in the doorway of this story with me and say, yes, I see it too. She picked up on the second ring and said my name like it was a lid she wasn't sure she wanted to open. I told her. The news, the name, the unit, the photograph of my porch light burning, the girl's name written in pencil as if light enough to erase. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said a sentence that made the road tilt under me. "Ruth," she whispered, "there is something I never told you." It turns out betrayal does not always come from a son who changed his name. Sometimes it comes from the people who tried to keep you from shattering. "Not here," I said. "Come to the house." My voice surprised me. It was solid. It had a spine. I waited on the porch with 2 mugs and the old photo albums. I watched the curve of the road like I had watched it when he was 17 and late for curfew. My sister's car appeared small and slow, as if even she wasn't sure we should do this. She got out and didn't look at me right away. She looked at the porch light. Then she said, "I think he came to me once, years ago, and I think I let him go." The world did not fall. It did something worse. It stood still while my heart learned a new shape. If your sister kept a secret like that, would you forgive her or would you walk away? Tell me what you'd do. And if you want to hear what she confessed on my porch, subscribe now. The next chapter hurts, but it matters. When my sister finally told me the truth, I thought I'd stop breathing. Because betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who swear they're protecting you. Before I tell you what she said that night on my porch, make sure you subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. You don't want to miss what came next. She sat across from me on that porch, the same one my son had walked off years ago, and held her coffee like it was keeping her together. The night was quiet except for the wind brushing the trees and the far-off sound of a train cutting through the valley. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked, soft but certain. "Ruth, he came to me, maybe 6, 7 years after he disappeared. For a moment, my mind refused to understand. The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. "What do you mean, came to you?" I asked, my own voice rough and low. She looked down at her cup. "He showed up at my door one night in Charlotte, said he couldn't stay, said it wasn't safe. He looked different, older, tired. He had a beard, a scar I didn't recognize, and eyes that didn't match his age anymore." My stomach turned. "And you didn't call me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "He begged me not to. He said if I loved him, I'd let him go." I stared at her. The porch light flickered once, the way it always did when the wind came down from the ridge. "You let him disappear again?" "I thought I was protecting him, and you," she said, wiping her eyes. "He said if I told you, it could ruin everything, that someone might hurt you both. He made me swear." I stood up, gripping the porch rail until the wood dug into my palms. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "You swore to the wrong person." She tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. Every breath I took hurt like splinters. "He was alive," I whispered, All those years, he was alive, and you just watched me break. I didn't know what to do, she said, her voice trembling. He looked scared, Ruth, like someone was chasing him. Then you should have told me, I said. If he was in trouble, I had a right to know. Tears slid down her cheeks. I know I should have. But he said one day, when it was safe, he'd come back for you. I waited too. I waited for that day, and it never came. I turned away, watching the road disappear into the dark. Do you know where he went? She hesitated. He mentioned Nevada, said he had a job that wasn't really a job, something with contracts, something confidential. He didn't give details. He just said, "Tell Mama I'm safe when it's over." But then he changed his mind, told me not to say a word. Safe when it's over, I repeated. Over what? She shook her head. He wouldn't say. I felt my knees weaken, so I sat down again. The porch boards creaked beneath me. For a while, neither of us spoke. The stars were dim, hidden behind thin clouds, like even the sky didn't want to watch. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because I saw the news, she said quietly, the same broadcast you did, and I realized, whatever he was afraid of, it's caught up with him. I thought you deserved to know before someone else told you. Her honesty cut deep, too late to save anything, but still sharp enough to draw blood. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, surrounded by ghosts. The smell of old photographs, the faint creak of floorboards where his steps once fell. I kept replaying her words. He came back. He looked different. He was scared. Scared of what? The next morning, I drove back to the storage unit. I needed to see if I missed anything. Something told me there was more. The manager gave me a strange look when I walked in again. "You were just here yesterday," he said. "I left something," I lied. He shrugged and handed me the key. "Take your time. Someone already paid for the next 2 months." My heart skipped. "Someone?" He nodded. "Man called earlier this morning. Said to keep the unit open under your name." I swallowed hard. "Did he leave a number?" "Nope. Just cash and a note that said, 'For her.'" I thanked him and hurried to the unit. The lock was the same, but when I opened the door, I noticed something different immediately. The boxes had been moved. The top box was open now. Inside was a small cassette recorder, the kind you'd find in old police stations. A note was taped to it. It read, "If you're here, then you know. Don't be afraid of the truth. Play this alone." My hands trembled as I pressed play. Static first, then a breath, then his voice. Older, deeper, but still his. "Mom, if you're hearing this, then I guess you found me before I found the courage to come back. I know you've seen things on the news. Half of it's true, half isn't. I didn't die. I didn't get lost. I chose to leave. And I did it because I thought I was saving you." The air around me thickened. I leaned against the wall as his voice continued. There were things happening at the plant before I left, things I shouldn't have known about. People were moving money, changing records, covering up accidents. I tried to report it, but the wrong people found out. Someone showed up at the house when you weren't home. They told me if I kept talking, something would happen to you. So I left. I changed everything, my name, my life, even my story. I thought I could outsmart them. Maybe I did for a while, but I never stopped checking on you. I drove by the house more times than I can count. I wanted to knock. I couldn't. I stopped the tape. My pulse was pounding so loud I could hear it echo off the concrete. My son hadn't just run away. He had vanished to protect me. I hit play again. I told Aunt Lila once, years later. I shouldn't have. I just needed someone to know I was alive. I made her promise not to tell you, and she kept that promise. Too well, too late. I thought I could come back someday, when it was over, but it never ended. The deeper I got, the more dangerous it became, and now maybe it's caught up with me. If you're hearing this, I'm sorry for every year I stole from you. I'm sorry for every prayer you prayed into an empty room. I never stopped being your son. I just stopped being the man I wanted to be. The tape clicked off. I sat there in the dark, the machine still humming faintly. I didn't know whether to scream or cry or pray. My heart was torn between relief and rage. Relief that he hadn't abandoned me out of coldness, rage that he still had. I looked around that small concrete room, at the photographs, the maps, the key to Reno, and realized the story I'd told myself for 3 decades wasn't just incomplete, it was upside down. My son hadn't been lost to betrayal, he'd been living inside it. If you found a message from someone who vanished, would you forgive their silence or demand answers? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The truth he left me next changed everything. I thought the tape would give me peace, but it didn't. It gave me questions, dangerous ones. Because if my son vanished to protect me, then who was he running from all those years? Before I tell you what I found in Reno, make sure you subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. What happened next still haunts my sleep. I sat in that storage unit until the air went cold. The cassette recorder was still humming softly, the tape spinning in its belly like it hadn't finished speaking. His words replayed in my mind. I never stopped being your son. That should have comforted me. It didn't. It made the silence of all those years hurt even worse. I thought of his father, long gone now, buried beside the old oak tree on the hill. He never got to know the truth, that our boy didn't run from us, but from something darker. I whispered a prayer to no one in particular and gathered the items from the box. The safe deposit key was next. The small, heavy thing felt alive in my palm. Reno, Nevada. That's where it led. That's where he'd hidden the rest of his story. I packed a small suitcase, the same one I'd used on the last trip I took with his father years ago. Inside went the essentials, a few clothes, his letter, and the cassette player. Before leaving, I left a note on my kitchen table. If I don't come back, I went to find him. It took 2 days of driving. I stopped in small towns, cheap motels, the kind with thin walls and faded curtains. I kept the radio off. The silence made me feel closer to him. By the time I reached Reno, the desert sun was bleeding orange over the hills. The bank was a glass-fronted building on the edge of downtown. The woman behind the counter looked up when I showed her the key. "You're here for box 222?" she asked. "Yes," I said quietly. She checked her system, then nodded. "It's been dormant for years, but you're listed on the authorization form." My breath caught. What? She turned the screen slightly toward me. There it was, his handwriting. Authorized access, Ruth Hart. My name. The one he'd buried. The one he still remembered. She led me to a small private room. The metal box sat on the table, cold and simple. I opened it slowly. Inside was an envelope thick with papers, a stack of old photographs, and a flash drive wrapped in a napkin. The photographs came first. Him in uniform. Not military, but something close. Tactical gear. A badge half hidden. Standing with a group of men, faces blurred. Another photo. Him beside a woman, the same one from the photo strip. They were standing outside a house with desert in the background. On the back, written in his hand, "Keep her safe." I flipped through more. Then I stopped. The last photo froze me. It was me, sitting on my porch, reading, the same summer dress I used to wear. The picture was taken from a distance, through trees. My heart raced. He had been watching over me. I set the photos aside and opened the envelope. Inside were government forms stamped with seals, contracts, and signatures. Some were blacked out, others marked confidential. It looked like he had worked as some kind of private operative, the kind of job where you disappear so often you forget how to come home. One document caught my eye, a letter written in his handwriting but never mailed. "If you're reading this, Mom, it means I didn't make it home again. I never wanted you to find out this way, but I couldn't let them use me anymore. Everything I did to keep our name out of their mouths. I know you'll find this one day, and when you do, please remember, I wasn't hiding from you. I was hiding for you." I couldn't stop the tears. They came quiet and steady. Years of waiting turned to water. I unwrapped the flash drive and stared at it. I didn't own a laptop, but the hotel down the road had a small business center. I checked in for the night, sat at a dusty old computer, and plugged it in. It held a single file, a video, dated 3 months before his arrest. The screen flickered. My son appeared, older, weary, eyes darting around like he expected someone behind the camera. "Mom," he said, voice low, "if you're seeing this, it's because they found me. I don't have much time. There are people in the system, not the government, behind it, using contracts to cover things that don't exist. Accidents, payments, lives gone missing. I was part of it once, and when I tried to expose it, they came after me. So I erased myself, changed names, changed everything. I thought I could stay hidden forever, but you can't outrun men who own the map." He leaned closer to the camera. "Don't trust anyone who asks about me, even if they say they're from the agency, especially if they say they're trying to help." The video glitched for a second, then returned. "There's a girl, Mom. Her name's June. If you ever find her, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I tried." Then the feed cut out. The room was silent, except for my heartbeat. I pressed my hand against the screen, my fingers trembling. He had been hunted. My boy, the one everyone said ran away. I packed everything and left the hotel that same night. The desert air outside was thick and electric. I felt eyes on me. Maybe memory, maybe something real. At the car, I checked my rearview mirror. 2 cars behind me. 1, then 2. No headlights, just shadows moving when I moved. I didn't wait to find out who they were. I drove, out of Reno, out of the city, into the endless desert road. Every turn of the wheels sounded like a heartbeat. Every mile felt like crossing into another life. At dawn, I stopped at a diner off Highway 50, the loneliest road in America. Fitting. I ordered coffee, black. My hands still shook as I held the cup. A man at the counter glanced my way. Gray suit, calm eyes, too calm. He smiled, like he knew something. When he stood up and walked to my booth, I braced myself. "Mrs. Hart," he asked softly, "you shouldn't have opened that box." If a stranger called you by name after decades of silence, would you listen or run? Tell me what you do in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The next part will make you question who really disappeared and why. When the man in the gray suit said my name, my blood went cold, because after 30 years of silence, strangers shouldn't know who you are, unless someone told them. Before I tell you what happened in that diner, make sure you subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This is where the past stopped knocking and started hunting. He said it again, soft and careful. "Mrs. Hart." I didn't answer right away. The coffee in my hand had gone cold, and the sound of the spoon clinking against the cup was the only thing I could hear. He smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just the way people do when they're used to being obeyed. He set a small leather wallet on the table and flipped it open. A badge. Too clean, too new. "Agent Davis," he said, "Department of Internal Security." I stared at the badge, then at him. "You found me fast." He shrugged, sliding into the booth across from me. "We've been looking for you since yesterday. You accessed a federal box under a flagged name. That tends to get attention." I forced a calm I didn't feel. "Then you already know what was inside?" He nodded slowly, enough to understand why you should have stayed away. I leaned forward. "Why? Because I found out my son was alive? Because I learned he spent half his life running from people like you?" His eyes didn't blink. "Ma'am, your son wasn't a hero. He wasn't a victim either. He worked for us, then against us. He took classified material and built a new life out of lies. You have no idea what he was involved in." Anger rose in my throat, bitter as metal. "You took my boy's name and buried him twice. Don't you dare tell me I don't know him." The agent's voice stayed level. "He stole from the government. Sensitive data, names, locations. People vanished because of what he did." "People vanished before he ever touched your files," I said quietly. "He told me everything he did was to protect me. Was that a lie too?" That made him pause. A flicker, just long enough for me to see something he didn't want me to. Doubt. "Whatever he told you," Davis said, lowering his voice, "don't repeat it. Don't send anything to the press. Don't go back to that storage unit. They're already watching it." they?" I asked. He didn't answer. He stood, leaving a card on the table. "If you care about your safety, go home, Mrs. Hart. Forget what you found." He walked out without paying for his coffee. I stared at the card. No phone number, just a seal embossed in gold. The words Federal Inquiry Division and a single line, "Stay silent." When I left the diner, the parking lot was empty. Only my car remained, covered in dust like it had aged overnight. I drove for hours without direction, through the desert, through small towns with single stoplights, through silence that felt alive. Every shadow in my rearview mirror looked like headlights waiting to appear. That night, I stopped at a roadside motel outside Fallon. The sign flickered, vacancy, in broken red neon. I took room 7, the one farthest from the office. The air inside smelled of rust and old tobacco. I locked the door, pushed the dresser against it, and sat on the edge of the bed. The flash drive, the photos, the letter, all spread before me like evidence in a case no one would ever try. I replayed my son's video again, focusing on every frame. In one corner of the shot, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a logo on the wall behind him, a faded insignia that matched the seal on Agent Davis's card. He had worked for them, whatever them was. My chest tightened. That meant Davis wasn't lying about everything. But why warn me instead of taking me in? The questions built up like smoke with nowhere to go. At midnight, the motel phone rang once, then again. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. A woman's voice whispered, "Ruth, don't trust him." I froze. "Who is this?" "June," she said. "He told me if anything happened, to find you." My heart stuttered. "June, from the note?" "Yes," she said. "He's gone, Ruth, and now they're coming for anyone who knows why." The line went dead. I sat there, the receiver trembling in my hand. The silence afterward was louder than thunder. The next morning, I packed everything and left before sunrise. I didn't check out. I didn't look back. The desert stretched ahead, miles of dry gold and whispers. Every mile marker looked the same. Every billboard faded to gray. But I wasn't driving to escape anymore. I was driving to find her, the girl my son trusted when he couldn't trust anyone else. I found her name again on the map from the storage unit. June, the small town circled near Salt Lake. That's where she'd been once. Maybe she still was. I drove for 2 days, sleeping in the car, eating crackers and coffee from gas stations. The cassette player sat on the seat beside me, his voice a ghost on replay. When I reached the town, it was smaller than I'd imagined. 1 main street, 2 diners, a church, and a motel called the Juniper Inn. The irony wasn't lost on me. I asked around quietly, showing the photo from the storage box, the one where he stood beside the woman with the wary smile. A clerk at the gas station recognized her right away. "She used to work at the library," he said. "Quiet lady. Moved out to a farmhouse on Miller Road." "Still around?" I asked. He hesitated. "Last I heard, she keeps to herself, doesn't like visitors. But yeah, she's around." I drove out there as the sun began to fall behind the mountains, painting everything gold. The road was gravel, the kind that hums under the tires. The house appeared small and weathered, with white paint peeling at the corners and a porch light that flickered, just like mine back home. I parked by the gate, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I opened the door, stepped out, and called softly into the quiet air. "June?" No answer. Only the creak of the porch swing moving in the wind. I took a step closer, then another. The air smelled faintly of sage and rain. Then, from behind me, a voice, low, steady, female. "You shouldn't have come here, Ruth." I turned and saw her. Older now, but unmistakable. The same eyes as my son. If you met someone who looked like the ghost of your child's secrets, would you stay or run? Tell me what you'd do in the comments, and make sure you subscribe. The next part reveals who June really was and the lie that held my family hostage for decades. The moment I turned and saw her face, my heart forgot how to beat, because June wasn't just someone my son had protected, she was the reason he disappeared. Before I tell you who she really was, make sure you subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. The truth that came next nearly destroyed me. She stood under the dying porch light, her hand resting on the wooden railing. The resemblance hit me before my mind caught up. The same sharp jawline, the same gray-blue eyes that my boy had. For a second, I couldn't speak. "June?" I managed to whisper. She nodded slowly. "You shouldn't have come, Mrs. Hart." Her voice was gentle, cautious, like someone who had practiced being quiet for too long. I took a step closer. "You called me. You told me they were coming." She shook her head. "I shouldn't have. They'll trace it. They always do." "Who are they?" I asked, my voice trembling. Her eyes darted toward the road. "The people your son worked for, and the people he tried to expose." I took another step, refusing to let the fear show. "Tell me the truth, June. You knew my son. You know what happened to him." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't just know him, Mrs. Hart." She hesitated, then said, "I'm his daughter." The world tilted. I must have swayed, because she caught my arm and helped me onto the porch swing. I sat there staring at her, my mind racing, trying to piece together what my heart already understood. "His daughter?" I repeated, barely breathing. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "He never told you. He couldn't. I was born after he disappeared. My mother kept everything secret. He visited when he could, always with a new name, always looking over his shoulder. She told me he was a good man who made dangerous choices for the right reasons." I covered my mouth. My son had been a father. I had a granddaughter. All those years I spent talking to an empty house, lighting candles, praying for a son who was already raising a child somewhere under a different sky. I whispered, "Why didn't he tell me?" She sat beside me, her hands twisting in her lap. "He wanted to, but when he saw what his truth had cost, your life, your peace, he thought staying away was mercy." Mercy. The word felt bitter in my mouth. "Where's your mother now?" I asked quietly. "Gone," she said softly. "She died 5 years ago. Cancer. He came to see her one last time. That was the first time I met him in person. The last time, too." I turned to her. "Did he know you were contacting me?" She shook her head. "No. He told me if anything ever happened to him, to find you, to tell you the truth, to keep you safe." "Safe from who?" She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. It was old, creased 100 times. I opened it carefully. Inside were coordinates, a location scribbled in pencil, followed by a single line in his handwriting. "If I disappear, tell her the river knows." "The river?" I asked. June nodded. "He said everything started there. The day before he left you, he went to meet someone by a river outside Asheville. He said what happened there changed everything." I looked up at her. "You mean to tell me, after all these years, the answer was back home?" She nodded again. "He wanted you to stay away from it, but I think he knew one day you'd look anyway." I sat there staring at the paper, feeling the weight of 3 decades pressing down on me. My son hadn't vanished into the wind. He'd left a trail, one breadcrumb at a time, back to where it began. June stood. "You can't go there alone. They're still watching. My father used to say the river keeps secrets, but it also buries them." I looked up at her, at the granddaughter I never knew I had. "Then I guess we'll dig the muck together." She blinked hard. "You'd really help me?" "I've spent 30 years burying ghosts," I said. "It's time I find their bones." We left at dawn. The sun climbed slow over the mountains, burning gold through the morning mist. We drove my old sedan east, 2 strangers bound by blood and grief. She told me stories as we drove, how he taught her to fish, how he called her Junebug, how he always checked every window twice before going to sleep. Every story was a gift and a wound. By nightfall, we reached Asheville. The town hadn't changed much, just new signs, new faces. But the river was the same, still winding through the valley, still whispering the same cold tune. We parked near an old bridge that hadn't been repaired in years. The sound of water rushing below was louder than I remembered. June pulled out the paper again. "The coordinates lead here," she said. We climbed down the bank together. The mud was soft, the air heavy with pine. I could see tire tracks leading down toward the water, old, faint, but still there. "This is where he met them," she said quietly. "He told my mother it was supposed to be a deal, a trade for information, but something went wrong." The current tugged at my shoes as I stepped closer to the edge. The river smelled of iron and time. "Look," June whispered, pointing toward a half-buried shape under the brush. I bent down. It was a metal box, rusted, heavy. My hands trembled as I wiped the dirt off the top. The lock was broken, eaten by years of water and weather. Inside were papers, sealed in plastic, still dry. Photos, maps, letters, names, government seals, evidence, real, tangible proof of whatever my son had been trying to expose. But one paper made me freeze. It was a death certificate. His. Dated the year after he disappeared. Signed by someone named Agent Davis. June gasped. "That's the man who followed you." The world tilted again. Everything snapped into focus. Davis's warning, the missing files, the years of silence. My son hadn't just vanished. He had been erased. I turned to June. "We need to leave. Now." As I spoke, headlights appeared on the ridge above us, slow, steady, deliberate. She grabbed my arm. They found us. The water roared louder, the sound of engines rolling closer. And for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. If you discovered proof that your child was erased by the very people he worked for, would you run or fight? Tell me what you'd do in the comments, and make sure you subscribe. The next part will reveal what the river gave back, and who it took. When those headlights cut through the trees, I knew the past had finally caught up. The truth wasn't buried in that river. It was guarded. Before I tell you what the water gave back that night, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what I saw next still keeps me awake. June's hand was shaking in mine. The headlights were still halfway up the ridge, two beams sweeping over the dark like searchlights. I could hear engines idling, then the crunch of boots on gravel. "Stay behind me," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I could protect her from. We slid down the bank, crouching behind an old fallen log. My heart was beating so loud, it felt like the whole forest could hear it. The air smelled like wet earth and diesel. Two men came down first, flashlights slicing through the dark. They moved like people who'd done this before. One of them called out, "We know you're down there. Come out, Mrs. Hart. This doesn't have to get ugly." The voice was familiar, calm, controlled. Agent Davis. I pressed my hand over June's. "Don't move," I whispered. He kept talking, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the water. "You've taken things that don't belong to you. The documents, the evidence. You're in possession of classified property." June whispered, "They'll kill us if we give it back." I glanced at her. She was right. There was something in his tone that didn't sound like someone enforcing law. It sounded like someone silencing witnesses. I leaned close to her ear. "We're not giving them anything." The second man spoke up, his voice lower, rougher. "You think you know what your son did, but you don't. He wasn't saving you, ma'am. He was saving himself." I almost believed him until I saw what the first man was holding, a piece of folded paper. Even in the dark, I recognized it, the coordinates, my son's handwriting. He'd gotten it from somewhere. Maybe June's old messages, maybe the storage unit. Either way, they were never supposed to find it. Davis's voice hardened. "Last warning. Step out, Mrs. Hart." The flashlight beam slid closer. It brushed my face for half a second, and I pulled June deeper into the shadows. My shoe slipped on the mud, and a branch cracked. "Down there!" someone shouted. The first shot hit the tree beside us. Splinters exploded like tiny stars. June gasped, covering her mouth. I grabbed her wrist. "Run!" We bolted through the brush, up toward the bridge. The night was chaos. Footsteps, shouting, the echo of boots on rocks. The moon hid behind clouds. The water roared louder, like it wanted to swallow the noise whole. Halfway up the hill, June stumbled. I turned to pull her up, and for a moment, our flashlight hit the river below. Something glinted, metal, long and dark. At first, I thought it was driftwood. But then I saw it, an old blue Chevy truck, half buried in mud and weeds. The front fender still had a dent I knew by heart. "My God," I whispered, "it's his truck." June's eyes widened. This is where it ended. We ran down again, sliding, slipping through mud until we reached it. The doors were rusted shut, windows clouded. But through the glass, I could see something inside. A box, the same kind from the storage unit. Bullets cracked in the distance. They were closing in. I grabbed a rock and smashed the side window. The sound shattered through the valley. Inside, the box was wedged under the seat. June reached in, pulling it free, hands bleeding from broken glass. She looked at me. "What if this is what they're after?" "It is," I said, "and we're not letting them have it." We ran toward the riverbank. I could see Davis's silhouette at the top of the hill now, flashlight bobbing as he came down. "Ruth," he called, "you don't understand what you're doing." I turned. "I understand enough." He stopped halfway, panting, flashlight steady on my face. "That box doesn't prove what you think. Your son wasn't a whistleblower. He was part of it. He built the system that made people vanish." June shouted, "You're lying."
"Am I?" he said, eyes locked on mine. "Why do you think we left you alive all these years, Mrs. Hart? He made sure of it. You were leverage." My chest clenched. Leverage for what? Davis took another step forward. "Insurance. If he talked, we'd find you. That's why he disappeared. That's why he changed names." For a moment I couldn't breathe. I wanted to tell him he was lying, but the look in his eyes, it wasn't triumph. It was pity. The water roared louder behind me. June was tugging at my arm. "Grandma, please, let's go." That word hit me like lightning. Grandma. After all this time, someone had said it out loud. I turned back to Davis. "Whatever my son did, I'm not letting you bury him again." And before he could take another step, I threw the box into the river. He shouted, lunging forward. June screamed as the box hit the current, spinning, sinking. Then came the second gunshot, closer this time. Davis stumbled. The other man behind him was holding the gun. For a second, I thought they were fighting, but then Davis turned, confusion on his face, and fell into the mud. The shooter looked at us, tall, expressionless, dressed in black. He lowered the gun slowly, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met. Then he said, almost casually, "Run." We didn't wait to be told twice. We ran until the headlights disappeared, until the sound of the river faded to memory. When we finally stopped, we were miles from the bridge. The sky was lightening, a faint blue stretching across the trees. My clothes were soaked, my knees scraped, but my hands were steady for the first time in years. June leaned against me, trembling. "What now?" I looked toward the horizon where the sun was rising. Now we find out what was in that box before the river took it. She frowned, "But it's gone." I shook my head. "No, baby. He left copies. My son was too smart to trust one place with the truth." June's eyes widened. "Where?" "In the one place nobody looked," I said. "Home. If you had one last chance to uncover the truth your child died for, would you risk your life to find it? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The next part will reveal what we found hidden in my house and the secret that changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and betrayal. They say every secret comes home eventually, and mine did, wrapped in dust and grief. Before I tell you what we found in my house that morning, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because this ending, it isn't peace, it's truth. By the time June and I reached my house in Asheville, the world had turned gray with dawn. The same gravel road, the same sagging porch, The same light still flickering above the door, a porch light that had burned every night since the day my boy disappeared. June stood in the yard, staring at it. "He came here, didn't he?" I nodded. "More than once. I just didn't know." The house felt smaller when we stepped inside, like it had been holding its breath for decades. Dust floated in the air, catching the morning light. His boots still sat by the door, right where I'd left them 30 years ago. June walked slowly around the room, touching things like they might disappear if she wasn't gentle. "It feels like he never left." I smiled sadly. "That's because, in some ways, he didn't." We started searching, carefully, quietly. Every drawer, every shelf, every creak of the old floorboards carried weight. I could almost hear his laugh echoing between the walls. June stopped by the old fireplace. "Grandma," she said softly, "there's something here." She pointed to a loose brick near the back. My heart skipped. I'd cleaned that fireplace for years, never noticed a thing. She pried it loose. Behind it, wrapped in an old handkerchief, was a small metal tin. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were 3 items: a folded letter, a key, and a flash drive. The letter was addressed to Mom, in case the river doesn't keep its promise. I sat down slowly and began to read.
Mom, if you found this, it means the people I ran from finally caught up. But it also means you kept believing I was worth finding. I left you this because I couldn't carry both the truth and the guilt anymore. The documents in Reno were part of the story, but not the whole one. The files on this drive, they show what I really found: Project Helios. Not the government, but the men behind it. They paid for silence. Accidents covered as budget errors, missing people listed as transfers. I thought I could stop it. Instead, I became part of it. If they find you, don't let them tell you I was a traitor. I wasn't brave either. I was just your son, trying to do one thing right before the end. If June's with you, tell her I'm proud. Tell her I watched her grow, even from the shadows. And tell her to forgive me for leaving both of you with the wreckage I made. There's a locker key with this letter. Inside is everything left to expose them. Use it or don't. Just know I never stopped loving you. I folded the paper, my tears falling onto the words until they blurred. June took my hand, her fingers small but strong. "He wanted us to finish what he started." I nodded. "Then we will." The key had a tag with a number, Locker 48. I knew where it belonged, the old bus depot downtown. It had closed years ago, boarded up and forgotten. But if the key was still good. We drove there just before sunrise. The streets were empty, the world still half asleep. The depot looked abandoned, windows clouded, weeds curling through the concrete. The door creaked open with a little push. Inside smelled like rust and rain. Rows of lockers lined the walls, all identical, except one. Locker 48 had fresh scratches near the handle, like someone had opened it not too long ago. I slipped the key in, turned it, and pulled. The door squealed open. Inside were folders, dozens of them, marked with codes, dates, names, people I didn't know. Some labeled personnel terminated, others reassigned. And at the bottom, one with my son's name, his real one. Inside that file was a final report stamped deceased, asset contained. Attached was a photo taken years after he vanished. My son, alive, sitting in a government office. Underneath, a single sentence: reclassified for internal security protocol. He hadn't just been running from them. He had been working within them, dismantling their lies piece by piece until they made him disappear. June whispered, "This is enough to prove everything." I looked at her, the weight of 30 years lifting and settling all at once. Then we get it out. We copied everything: photos, files, reports. June, being younger, knew how to upload them. She sent them to news outlets, investigators, people who'd been asking questions for years and getting silence. By sunset, the world finally knew his name again, the right one this time: Michael Hart, whistleblower, missing 30 years. Headlines spread, reporters called, agents denied, but the truth had legs now, and it ran faster than any lie. That night, I sat on the porch while June slept inside. The mountains were quiet. The same porch light burned just as it always had. For the first time in 3 decades, I didn't leave it on for someone who was lost. I left it on for the truth that finally found its home. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "You did it, son. You came back." The wind moved through the trees like a sigh of relief. Maybe he wasn't gone at all. Maybe pieces of him had been guiding me all along, through the silence, the fear, the years of doubt. The world would remember him as a man who vanished, but I'd remember him as my boy who came home the only way he could, through the truth. And as the night deepened, I realized something else. Betrayal had built this story, but love had carried it through. That's how I survived it. That's how I forgave it. And that's why I'm still telling it now. If you've ever waited for the truth, hold on to hope. It always finds its way home. Tell me what part of this story touched you the most, and don't forget to subscribe. More true stories of love, loss, and quiet justice are coming soon.